They say the night has its own language. Not the kind you learn in school, not the kind you speak to be understood. The night speaks in creaks and sighs, in the slow complaint of old wood, in the hush between wind gusts, in the way a dog suddenly lifts its head and stares at nothing. And if you've ever been a child lying awake, eyes wide, breath held, listening for footsteps that aren't there, you've heard it. You've heard the night trying to tell you something. In many homes, the night comes with rules. Don't wander, don't open the door, don't call out, don't look too long into the dark, and most of all, sleep. Because if you don't sleep, if you fight it, if you stay awake when you're not supposed to, someone might notice. Someone might come. The old ones have names for that someone. Names shaped by accents, by oceans crossed, by centuries of fear carried in the mouths of parents and poured into the ears of children. In Spain, they called him El Coco. In Portugal, O Coco. In parts of Latin America, the name changed, the shape shifted, the legend grew teeth. In Mexico and beyond, he became El Cucuí. Some people say El Cucuí is only a story, a warning, a tool, a simple trick to make children behave. But that's what people always say about things they don't understand. Things that have survived too long to be merely invented. Things that appear again and again in places that never spoke to each other. In the same shape of dread, the same cold hand on the back of the neck. They say El Cucuy is what comes for disobedient children. But the truth, if there is a truth, is much stranger. Because sometimes El Cucuy doesn't take children who are bad. Sometimes he takes children who are simply awake. And if you listen long enough, if you stay up long enough, you might start to wonder whether the legend is meant to scare children into sleeping, or to protect them from what notices the ones who don't. This story begins in a small place, the kind of place that sits quiet on a map, easily missed. A town tucked between dry hills and a stubborn line of green, where a river refuses to vanish. A town of dusty streets, tin roofs, and adobe walls that held the day's heat late into the night. The town's name was San Esteban, and if you ask the right people, if you ask the elderly, the ones who still believe the world has edges, they'll tell you San Esteban has a shadow, not the kind cast by the mountains, the other kind, the kind that moves even when nothing is moving. But in 1912, San Esteban wasn't famous for anything. It wasn't cursed in the mouths of travelers. It was just a town, a place of rosaries and work, of small joys and smaller tragedies, the kind of place where everyone had a story, and no one expected their story to become a warning. In San Esteban, the nights were dark. There were lamps, yes, and candles. But electricity wasn't a thing you trusted, not here. Here, darkness was honest. Darkness belonged to the land. It filled the spaces between houses and pooled under doorways like spilled ink. When the sun dropped, families pulled in tight. They shut windows, they spoke softer. They told their children to wash, to pray, to eat, and then sleep. Because in San Esteban, there was a word mothers said with a hush they didn't use for God, Cucuy. The mothers of San Esteban didn't say it often. They didn't like to. They believed that names were hooks, that speaking a thing could catch it. But when children ran too close to the river, or wandered too far into the brush, or refused to close their eyes when the night thickened, the mothers would lean close and whisper, "Duermete," or "El Cucuy will come." Most children learned quickly, but there was one boy, and his name was Diego. Diego was 9 years old, all elbows and scabbed knees. He had the kind of restless energy that made adults tired just watching him. He climbed trees and fences. He ran until his lungs burned. He had a laugh that bounced off the walls of the courtyard like a stray ball. And at night, when his mother told him to sleep, Diego treated sleep as a challenge he could win. His mother's name was Lourdes. She worked hard, her hands cracked from soap and water, her back bent from days that didn't care if she was tired. She loved her son fiercely, but she was strict. Not cruel. Strict the way poor mothers had to be, because danger didn't wait for softness. On the night it happened, Lourdes had been washing dishes. listening to Diego talk about nothing and everything. Diego's dog, an old mutt named Sombra, lay by the door, ear twitching at every sound outside. The air smelled like tortillas and dust. A normal night. Time, Lourdes said, wiping her hands. Diego groaned, rolling his eyes as if bedtime were an insult. I'm not sleepy, he said. You will be, Lourdes replied. He tried to bargain. Just 5 minutes. No. Just until the candle... No. Diego stomped toward his room, dragging his feet, performing misery like theater. Lourdes followed him, placed a hand on his head, kissed his hair, then made the sign of the cross over his forehead, like her mother had done to her. Eyes closed, she said. Diego's eyes were anything but closed. They darted around, searching for the next thing to climb, the next thing to do. Lourdes sighed. Diego, she warned softly, and there it was, the tone that held the weight of old stories. He smirked. I'm not afraid of El Cucuy. Lourdes didn't smile. She didn't like hearing the name in her house. She turned down the lamp and left his door slightly open, the way she always did, so the darkness wouldn't swallow him whole. She didn't know that Diego wasn't planning to sleep at all, because Sombra had been scratching at the door all evening. Not begging to go out, exactly. More like listening to something outside and wanting to check it. Diego saw that and felt a familiar itch, curiosity, the kind that gets children killed. When Lourdes finally went to her own bed, when the quiet settled, Diego waited. He listened for her breathing to deepen. He listened for the house to become still. Then, he slipped out of bed, barefoot, moving like a thief. Sombra lifted his head, tail wagging once, hesitant. Shh, Diego whispered, grinning. He eased the back door open, the hinge complaining softly. Sombra slid out first, nose low to the ground. Diego followed, the night air cool on his skin. Above him, the sky was sharp with stars. The town slept. Diego wanted to run. He wanted to see what Sombra was smelling. He wanted to feel the night without the rules. They moved past the courtyard, down the narrow lane, toward the churchyard, where the old stone crosses stood like broken teeth. The church's silhouette loomed dark and heavy. Diego felt a little shiver then. Something like excitement, something like fear he refused to name. Sombra stopped at the edge of the churchyard and growled. Diego froze. What is it? He whispered. The dog's ears were flat. His body was rigid. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, Sombra backed away. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He retreated like an animal that has seen something it knows it cannot fight. Diego swallowed. He couldn't see much beyond the churchyard. Just shadows. Just the shape of the well near the corner of the yard, the stone lip worn smooth by years of hands and rope. A sound came from that direction, not a voice, not a footstep. Something softer, like breathing, like someone exhaling slowly in the dark. Diego's heart hammered. He should have turned back. He should have run home, slammed the door, crawled under his blanket, and prayed. Instead, he stepped forward. It was only a few steps. The churchyard dirt was cool beneath his feet. He moved toward the well, squinting. The air smelled damp, like wet soil after rain, even though it hadn't rained in days. Sombra whined. Diego's throat went dry. Who's there? He called, and immediately regretted it. The breathing stopped. The silence that followed felt thick, as if the night itself had leaned in to listen. Then, from somewhere near the well, came a whisper. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to reach him. Diego. His name, spoken like a lullaby. Soft, intimate, as if whoever said it had known him forever. Diego's blood turned to ice. He took a step back, and the darkness by the well shifted. It wasn't a person standing there, not exactly. It was more like a shape that was borrowing the idea of a person, a silhouette that didn't belong to any body Diego recognized. It was too tall for a child, too thin for an adult. Its head was tilted, like an animal listening. Diego couldn't see its face, but he could feel it looking at him. Sombra let out a sudden yelp and bolted, sprinting back toward the town. Diego tried to follow, but his legs wouldn't move right. He felt rooted, pinned by something unseen. The shape near the well leaned forward slightly, and the whisper came again. Come. Diego's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The next thing he remembered, if he ever remembered anything at all, was the sudden sensation of falling asleep while standing up, a wave of heaviness, as if the night had poured itself into his veins. His knees buckled, and the darkness caught him. In the morning, Lourdes found Diego's bed empty, sheets cold. She screamed his name, ran into the courtyard, called neighbors, pounded on doors. Men grabbed lanterns and machetes. They searched the riverbanks. They searched the brush. They searched the churchyard. Near the well, they found Sombra shaking, hiding behind a stone cross, eyes wide and unfocused. When someone tried to touch him, he snapped and retreated, as if the hand were fire. They found no footprints that made sense, just a scuff in the dirt, a smear like something had been dragged, and the faint impression of small, bare feet, ending abruptly near the well's edge. The townspeople murmured. They crossed themselves. They looked at the priest, Father Tomas, as if he could name what had happened. Father Tomas was a young priest, only a few years in San Esteban. He had studied in the city. He believed in God, in sin, in human weakness. He did not believe in monsters, not at first. He stood in the church that morning, listening to Lourdes sob, and tried to offer comfort. He said the things priests said. We will find him, we will pray. God watches, God protects. But when Lourdes raised her face wet with tears, her eyes were sharp. No, she whispered, he doesn't. Father Tomas felt a chill. Do not speak that way. She shook her head, trembling. I warned him. I told him. I told him to sleep. The other women in the church went still. A hush fell. Lourdes swallowed, voice breaking. I said the name, she confessed. I said it in my house. Father Tomas frowned. What name? Lourdes looked at him as if he were a child. El Cucuí. The priest's mouth tightened. That is a story, a superstition. Lourdes laughed. One sharp, bitter sound. Then why is my son gone? The town searched for days, a week, 2. The river gave up nothing. The hills gave up nothing. And slowly the searches became smaller, quieter, as if everyone was afraid of finding the answer. Then another child vanished. Her name was Alma. She was 7. Quiet. Sweet. The kind of child who did what she was told and still apologized for existing. Alma disappeared from her bed without a sound. Her mother, Isadora, insisted she had been awake that night. She insisted she heard something in the room, a rustle, a soft tapping, then a whisper. She said the whisper sounded like Alma's own voice, calling her mother's name as if she needed help. Isadora said she got up, moved toward the bedroom, and then felt wrong, like her body suddenly didn't belong to her, like the hallway stretched longer than it should, like the air thickened. Hey! She said she reached Alma's door and saw something in the darkness that made her stop. Not a figure, not exactly. A shadow on the wall. A shadow that was shaped like a person hunched over a bed. But the shadow's arms were too long. The shadow's head was too large. And the shadow moved, even though Isadora's candle was still. Isadora's voice shook as she told it. I wanted to scream, she said, but I couldn't. It felt like my throat was full of sand. She said she watched the shadow lift, as if carrying something, and then she watched Alma's blankets slide slowly off the bed, as if tugged by invisible hands. Alma didn't cry out. Alma didn't move. Then the shadow was gone. Isadora ran into the room, found the bed empty, the window closed, the door still latched. Alma had vanished like breath in winter air. The town erupted. Panic became a living thing. Mothers slept in doorways, blocking exits with their own bodies. Fathers kept knives by their beds. People began to hang charms above doorframes. Old things, herbs and bones and strings of garlic. They burned copal. They sprinkled salt at thresholds. They whispered prayers that had nothing to do with the church. Father Tomas tried to stop them. He preached against superstition. He said fear was the devil's tool. He said the only protection was faith. But faith was harder when children were missing. The 3rd child disappeared 3 nights later. The 4th, a week after that. The names became a list spoken softly, like a prayer. Diego, Alma, Martine, Lucia. With each disappearance, a rumor grew. People claimed to see things in the corner of their vision, a figure at the edge of lamplight, a shadow that did not match its owner. Some said they heard scratching under floorboards. Others said they heard laughter from empty streets. A few claimed the well in the churchyard had begun to smell like rot. The town's fear began to shape itself into something clearer, something older. They began to say the name openly, no longer afraid to hook it, because maybe the hook had already been set, El Cucuí, but there was one man who refused. Arturo Reyes was a woodcutter, broad-shouldered, calloused, the kind of man who believed in what he could lift and cut and bleed. He had heard the stories as a child, of course. Everyone had. But he'd grown up and grown out of them. Life had taught him that monsters were human. Hunger, disease, war, a man with a knife in the wrong alley, not shadows, not whispering things. Arturo lived with his sister, Pilar, and her daughter, Marisol. Marisol was 5 years old and loved to sing to herself while she played. She had eyes too big for her face, curious and bright, and a smile that made Arturo's heart feel less heavy. Arturo was protective of her, even if he didn't show it. He was the kind of uncle who grunted instead of saying, "I love you," who brought her carved wooden toys instead of hugs. After the disappearances began, Pilar was terrified. She insisted Marisol sleep in the same bed as her. She insisted the window stay locked. She insisted on leaving a candle burning all night, even though candles cost money. Arturo grumbled, but he let her. He even began checking the door latch twice before bed, telling himself it was for Pilar's peace, not because he felt the town's fear under his skin, too. One night, Pilar begged him, "Arturo, promise me. Promise you won't let her out of your sight." He sighed. "No one is taking her." Pilar's eyes flashed. "You don't know that." Arturo looked away. "I know there is no monster." Pilar leaned close, voice trembling. "Then, explain the children." He opened his mouth, closed it. He had no explanation, only stubbornness. That night the wind was strong. It threw dust against the windows. It made the roof groan. Marisol slept with her small hand clutching Pilar's blouse. Arturo lay on a pallet near the door, half asleep, listening to the house breathe. Sometime after midnight, Arturo woke to a sound that didn't belong. Tapping, slow, deliberate, like a fingernail against glass. Arturo sat up, heart suddenly awake. He listened. Tap, tap, tap. It came from Marisol's window. He grabbed his machete and moved across the room, careful not to wake Pilar. The candle's flame trembled, throwing shadows across the walls. Arturo's eyes locked on the window. Tap, tap. Arturo's jaw clenched. He lifted the machete, ready to swing if he saw a thief's face. But there was nothing outside. Just darkness. Just the faint reflection of the candle in the glass. Tap. Arturo raised his hand to unlatch the window, and then he heard it, so soft, he almost thought he imagined it. A whisper, not from outside, from inside the room. "Marisol." Arturo froze. The whisper came again. "Marisol. Ven." Marisol's eyes opened. Arturo turned sharply. The child was sitting up, as if pulled by strings. Pilar was still asleep, her face turned away, unaware. "Marisol," Arturo hissed. "Stay." But Marisol didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the corner of the room near the wardrobe, the darkest corner, where the candlelight didn't reach. Arturo followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. Because in that corner, the shadows were wrong. They seemed to gather, thickening like smoke. And within them, something moved. Arturo tightened his grip on the machete. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice low. The shadow shifted. It stretched upward, as if standing. A shape formed, tall, hunched, the outline of a head, shoulders, arms too long. Arturo could not see a face, but he felt eyes on him, eyes like pressure. Marisol slid out of bed. Pilar stirred, murmured, but didn't wake. Arturo stepped between Marisol and the corner. "No." His voice was firm now, the voice of a man who has decided fear is a thing to crush. The shape leaned slightly, as if amused. And then the whisper changed. It became Marisol's own voice, perfect, soft. "Tio," it said, "come." Arturo's blood ran cold. He looked at Marisol, searching her face, but she stared past him, entranced. Arturo swung the machete at the darkness. The blade cut through empty air. The candle flame flickered violently, as if a wind had blown through the room. For a second, everything went dim. Shadows jumped. Pilar woke with a gasp. ¿Qué pasa?" she cried. Arturo turned to answer, and in that split second, Marisol walked around him. She moved toward the wardrobe corner, small feet silent on the floor. "Marisol!" Pilar screamed, lunging, but Pilar's body jolted as if she had hit an invisible wall. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest, eyes wide, unable to breathe. Arturo tried to reach her. His legs felt heavy, thick, like moving through water. The shadow in the corner opened. Not like a mouth, like a doorway. A darkness deeper than the room's darkness, an absence that made Arturo's eyes ache. Marisol stepped into it without hesitation. Arturo roared and surged forward, forcing his body to move. His hand grabbed at the air where Marisol had been, but his fingers closed on nothing. The doorway, like darkness, snapped shut. The corner was just a corner again. The candle steadied. Pilar's breath came back in a ragged gasp. She sobbed, scrambling toward the empty space where her daughter had vanished. "No, no, no, no." Arturo stood frozen, machete in hand, staring at the corner. His mind tried to reject what he had seen. It tried to name it as trickery, as smoke, as hallucination. But Marisol was gone. Pilar's terror was real. The room smelled suddenly like damp earth. Arturo looked at Pilar and felt something break inside him. His skepticism shattered, replaced by a rage so fierce it tasted like blood. He swore then, not to God, not to anyone listening. He swore to find her. At dawn, the town gathered in Pilar's courtyard. The story spread in minutes. Marisol taken from inside a locked house, taken while her mother watched, taken while her uncle swung a blade at shadows. People crossed themselves. They whispered the name with trembling lips. El Cucuí. Father Tomas arrived, face pale. He tried to calm them, but his voice lacked conviction now. He saw Pilar's grief, heard Arturo's furious insistence that something was in the room, and for the first time, the priest felt the edges of doubt. Arturo didn't wait for permission. He strapped his boots, took his lantern, his machete, and a coil of rope. He went to Lourdes, to Isidora, to the families of the missing, and asked for anything, any clue, any detail. He listened to every whisper story, every superstition, every rumor. Patterns emerged. The children always vanished at night. The children always vanished without screams. The houses always smelled damp afterward, like soil turned over. And always, there were whispers. Arturo went to the churchyard well. He stood by its stone lip, looked down into the darkness, and felt the hair on his arms rise. The air around the well was colder than it should have been. He leaned closer, lantern light trembling over black water far below. He heard something. Not a voice. Not exactly. A faint sound like breathing. Arturo backed away, jaw clenched. He wasn't afraid of a well. He wasn't afraid of darkness. But he was afraid of what the well seemed to represent. A mouth, a tunnel, a place where the world could open. That night, Arturo did something no one else dared. He went into the hills alone. The forest outside San Esteban was thin, scrubby in places, dense in others. Mesquite, cactus, small twisted trees. At night, it became a maze of shadows. Arturo carried his lantern low, keeping his machete ready. He followed instinct more than trail, moving toward the places where he felt watched. Hours passed. The town's lights faded behind him. The night grew deeper. The wind died. Even the insects seemed quieter, as if something had told them to hush. Then Arturo heard it. A child crying, soft, distant. So faint it could have been the wind. But Arturo froze and listened, and it came again. A sobbing sound, muffled, like someone crying with a hand over their mouth. Arturo swallowed, heart pounding. "Marisol," he called, voice cracking. The crying stopped. Silence. Then, footsteps. Light, quick, running through brush. Arturo turned, lantern swinging. He saw movement between trees, a small figure darting away. Espera! He shouted, sprinting after it. Branches whipped his face. Thorns snagged his shirt. He ran harder, desperate, ignoring pain. The figure stayed just ahead, always visible for a second, then slipping behind a tree, behind a rock, like it wanted him to follow. Arturo's lungs burned, his legs ached, but his rage kept him moving. The figure led him deeper into the hills, toward an old abandoned mine that the town avoided. The mine was a scar in the earth, a dark opening surrounded by collapsed timbers. People said it was cursed. People said men had died there, buried alive, screaming into stone. Arturo had never believed that either. But now, standing before the mine mouth, lantern light trembling against blackness, Arturo felt something he couldn't name. The air from the mine was cold and wet. It smelled like the well, like soil, like something ancient. The small figure stood near the entrance, back to him. Marisol, Arturo whispered. The figure turned. It wasn't Marisol. It was shaped like a child, yes. Small shoulders, thin arms, but the proportions were wrong. The head was too large, the limbs too long. Its skin did not reflect lantern light properly, as if it were made of smoke and ash, and its face seemed blurred, like a smear of darkness except for the eyes, pale and bright, shining like moonlight on water. It smiled. The smile was wrong. Too wide, teeth too many. Arturo's stomach lurched. He raised his machete. Where is she? The thing tilted its head as if considering. Then it spoke, not in its own voice, in Marisol's voice. Tio, it whispered. I'm here. Arturo's grip tightened so hard his knuckles ached. Liar. The thing's smile widened. Come. Arturo stepped forward anyway, because what else could he do? He would walk into hell if it meant finding Marisol. The mine's darkness seemed to thicken as he approached. The lantern flame shrank, as if being suffocated. Arturo felt a pressure in his ears, like descending underwater. He kept going. The thing backed into the mine mouth, retreating slowly, beckoning with long fingers. Arturo followed. Inside, the mine swallowed sound. The air was damp, heavy. Water dripped somewhere, slow and steady, like a clock. Arturo's lantern cast shaky light on stone walls, streaked with mineral stains. The tunnel sloped downward. He heard whispers, not one voice, but many. Soft murmurings, like a crowd speaking far away. He couldn't make out words, just the sensation of being surrounded by unseen mouths. Arturo's chest tightened. He forced himself to breathe. Marisol, he called again. A faint giggle echoed from deeper in the mine. Arturo hurried, boots scraping stone. The tunnel widened into a chamber. Old mining equipment lay rusted and broken, and in the center of the chamber, a pile of blankets, small blankets, children's blankets. Some stained, some torn, some familiar patterns from town households. Arturo's blood went cold. He stepped closer, lantern shaking. He saw a doll, a wooden toy, a small shoe, evidence, proof. Marisol, he whispered, voice breaking. A whisper answered behind him. So close it felt like breath against his ear. Arturo! He spun, machete up. The thing stood in the tunnel entrance, blocking the way back. Its eyes gleamed. Its smile was patient. Arturo backed toward the chamber wall. You did this. The thing tilted its head. You called me. Arturo's throat tightened. No. The thing's voice became something deeper, layered. You fed me. Arturo's mind raced. He remembered Pilar whispering the name. He remembered Lourdes. He remembered himself as a boy, laughing at the story, yet feeling the thrill of fear. He remembered the town now, murmuring El Cucuí like a prayer. The thing took a step closer. The lantern flame flickered violently. Arturo's mouth went dry. Where are they? The thing leaned in. For a moment, Arturo thought he saw faces in the darkness of its body. Small faces, pale and frightened, pressed against the inside like trapped fish beneath ice. Then the thing's mouth opened. Not in a human way. It split wider, impossibly, as if the darkness itself were tearing. And the whispers became screams, muffled, distant, like voices from the bottom of a well. Arturo's vision blurred. He felt dizziness, like sleep trying to drag him down. His eyelids grew heavy. His knees weakened. The thing's voice softened, gentle as a lullaby. Sleep. Arturo fought it. He bit his tongue hard enough to taste blood. Pain flared sharp, anchoring him. He gritted his teeth, forcing his eyes open. He raised his machete and swung, not at the thing, but at the lantern. The lantern shattered against rock. Darkness exploded. For a heartbeat, Arturo saw nothing at all. Then, light. Not lantern light. Something pale, cold, coming from the thing's eyes. It filled the chamber like moonlight underwater, illuminating stone and rust and the pile of children's belongings. Arturo moved toward the tunnel entrance blindly, using memory and instinct. He swung his machete again, slicing air, hearing something hiss. Not pain, but annoyance. He ran. He ran up the tunnel, boots slipping on wet stone. Behind him, whispers chased him, overlapping voices calling his name, calling Marisol's name, calling Diego, Alma, Martín, Lucia. He didn't look back. He burst out of the mine mouth, collapsing into the night air, gasping. The sky above was still full of stars, indifferent. Arturo scrambled up, sprinted down the hillside, not stopping until he saw the first faint light of town lamps. When he reached Pilar's house, he was shaking. He told the town what he'd seen. He told them about the blankets, the toys, the pile of children's things. He told them about the mine. And for the first time, San Esteban had something besides fear. It had a place, a location, a scar in the earth to point at and say, there. The men gathered. They brought torches. They brought rope, picks, guns. Father Tomas came too, carrying a Bible and holy water, face grim. At the mine mouth, the air was colder than the night. The torches burned strangely, flames pulling downward. The men hesitated. Arturo stepped forward. We go in, he said. We bring them out. Father Tomas swallowed. Pray. They entered. The mine swallowed them like a mouth. Inside, the whispers began immediately, murmuring from stone. Some men flinched, muttered prayers. Others cursed, pretending bravery. They reached the chamber Arturo described. The pile of blankets was there, the toys, the shoe, but something else was there too. Marks on the stone floor. Lines scratched deep like claw marks. Symbols carved into rock, old and crude. Not Spanish. Not anything Father Tomas recognized. Shapes like spirals, eyes, mouths. One of the men, a miner's son named Joaquin, whispered, "This is older than us." Father Tomas knelt by the carvings, trembling. He sprinkled holy water. The water hissed faintly on the rock, evaporating faster than it should. The whispers rose louder now, like a crowd swelling. Then from deeper in the tunnel came a sound that made the men freeze. A child laughing, high, clear. It echoed through stone like a bell. Arturo's heart lurched. "Marisol!" he shouted. He ran toward the sound, torch held high. The others followed, shouting, scrambling. The tunnel narrowed, twisting. The laughter led them deeper, always ahead, always just out of reach. Then the tunnel opened into another chamber. And there, in the center, stood a figure. Not a child, not a man. A shape made of darkness and suggestion. Taller than Arturo, hunched, arms too long. Its eyes gleamed pale. But what made the men recoil was what hung from its body, like shadows clinging to it. Small shapes, faces, children. They weren't fully solid. They looked like reflections on water. But their eyes were open, wide with fear. Their mouths moved, silently screaming. Arturo stumbled forward. "Marisol!" One of the faces turned toward him. A little girl's face. Marisol's face. Her lips moved. Arturo couldn't hear the words, but he saw them clearly. "Help!" He roared and lunged. The thing moved faster than a shadow should. It swept an arm through the air, and the torch flames in the chamber flickered, then went out as if suffocated. Darkness slammed down. Men shouted. Someone fired a gun. 3 blasts, deafening in the enclosed space. The echoes bounced wildly. Father Tomas prayed loudly, voice shaking. "In the name of..." A whisper cut through him, close, intimate. The priest froze, eyes widening. The whisper spoke his name. Tomas! The priest's voice faltered. The men screamed as the darkness seemed to shift, to move like a living thing. Some ran blindly. Others swung picks at empty air. Arturo felt that same wave of sleep press down on him. His eyelids grew heavy. His body wanted to collapse. But then, pain. He felt a hand clamp on his arm. Joaquin, the miner's son, was gripping him hard, nails digging into skin. No duermas, Joaquin hissed. No sleep. Arturo blinked hard, forcing himself awake. In the darkness, he heard the thing's voice, layered, amused. You came to my house? Father Tomas's prayer rose again, desperate. Lord, protect. The thing laughed. The laugh was not human. It sounded like air rushing into a deep hole. Then a child's voice cried out, Diego's voice, faint, echoing. Mama! Lourdes' scream echoed from behind, raw grief, as if she had heard him too, even though she wasn't there. The darkness shifted again, and Arturo felt movement, something brushing past him, cold as river water. A man screamed, another shouted a name, then silence. Arturo swung his machete blindly and felt it connect with something, not flesh, but resistance, like cutting through thick cloth. A hiss. The pressure of sleep lessened, just for a moment. Father Tomas, voice trembling, began to sing. Not a hymn, exactly, but an old chant in Latin, words learned in seminary. His voice was a thin line of sound in the dark, but it anchored them. Arturo groped for his torch, found it, struck flint, desperate. A spark, flame flared, light returned. And for a heartbeat, Arturo saw the thing clearly. Not a shadow, not a man. A creature shaped by fear and story, its body like smoke packed dense, its eyes pale, its mouth a line that widened too far. Around it, the children's faces writhed like trapped souls. Arturo raised his machete and charged. The thing's eyes narrowed, not angry, curious. Father Tomas threw holy water. The droplets hit the creature and hissed, burning like acid. The creature recoiled slightly, the first sign of discomfort. The children's faces flickered, their expressions shifting, as if the creature's hold had weakened. Arturo swung. The blade cut through the creature's form, scattering smoke. The creature hissed again, the sound vibrating in Arturo's bones. Joaquin shouted, "The symbols!" He pointed to the carvings on the floor, now faintly visible in torchlight. "Break them!" Arturo understood instinctively. The carvings were not decoration. They were a doorframe, a binding, a thing that held the creature in place, or held the opening to wherever it came from. Men rushed forward, striking the carvings with picks and stones. The rock chipped. Dust rose. The whispers grew louder, frantic. The creature's body rippled. Its mouth opened wider, releasing a rush of cold air that blew torches sideways. The children's faces screamed, this time with sound. A burst of voices, overlapping, shrieking, pleading. Arturo shouted Marisol's name. Father Tomas cried out prayers. Men hammered at stone until their hands bled. Then the carvings cracked. A jagged line split the largest symbol, an eye shape carved deep. When it broke, the air in the chamber changed instantly, like pressure releasing. The creature shrieked. Its form collapsed inward, smoke sucked into an unseen void. The children's faces flashed brighter, then burst apart like reflections shattered on water. For a moment, Arturo thought they were free. Then the darkness surged one last time, violently like a wave. Torches went out, men fell, the chamber spun, and then silence. When the men stumbled back into the mine tunnel, dragging each other, coughing, shaking, they were fewer than before. They counted heads in the dawn light outside. One man was missing, two. Arturo's throat went tight. He looked at Father Tomas, whose face was ashen. "Where are the children?" Arturo demanded, voice broken. Father Tomas's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know." They searched the mine again, carefully this time in daylight with ropes and mirrors. The chamber with the carvings was different now. Emptier, colder. The pile of blankets was still there, but the children were gone, the faces were gone. There was no portal, no creature. only the sense that something had been disturbed, something ancient woken and angered. The town mourned. It held funerals for children without bodies. Mothers wailed. Fathers drank. People blamed Father Tomas, blamed Arturo, blamed each other. And yet, after that night, no more children vanished. San Esteban lived, but it was changed. It carried a scar, like the mine mouth in the hills. People stopped saying El Cucuy aloud. They acted as if silence could seal the wound. Years passed. Families moved away. The town shrank. The mine collapsed further, its entrance partially buried by rock slides. The churchyard well was sealed with a heavy stone lid, chained shut, as if preventing something from climbing out. And so the legend became just that again, a legend. But legends don't die. They travel. They adapt. They find new homes in new languages. Decades later, far from San Esteban, the name El Cucuy was still whispered in kitchens and bedrooms, in barrios and suburbs, in places where Spanish mixed with English, where old fears lived beside new conveniences. Parents still warned, Duérmete, el Cucuy viene. Sometimes children laughed. Sometimes they believed. And sometimes something listened. In the late 1990s, a folklorist named Dr. Maria Rojas began collecting stories about El Cucuy. She was born in Mexico City, but raised partly in the United States. She spoke Spanish with her grandmother's cadence and English with academic precision. She had heard the name El Cucuy as a child, as a threat, as a joke, as a comfort. Because sometimes fear was a kind of comfort, a way to explain why the night felt alive. Dr. Rojas wasn't searching for monsters. She was searching for meaning, for how cultures shape fear and pass it down, for how a story can become a tool, a weapon, a shield. She traveled from town to town, recording interviews on a small tape device. She listened to grandmothers describe the Cucuy as a hairy beast that ate children. She listened to fathers insist it was nothing but a myth. She listened to teenagers laugh about it around campfires, and then fall silent when a branch snapped in the dark. Over and over, she found the same details, repeated by people who had never met, from places far apart. Whispers, footsteps that didn't match prints, the smell of damp earth, children disappearing without screams, and the strangest detail of all, many witnesses described feeling sleepiness, sudden and crushing, as if something were pushing their bodies into unconsciousness. Dr. Rojas wrote in her field notes, the Cucuy is consistently associated with sleep, not simply punishment for lack of sleep, but an agent of sleep, a force that induces it. The idea bothered her. It suggested the legend wasn't just about keeping children in bed. It suggested the legend was about something else entirely, something in the dark that prefers humans unconscious, vulnerable. The more Dr. Rojas gathered, the more she found references to older stories. In Spain and Portugal, El Coco was described as something that took children and put them in a sack. Some versions said it lived in wells. Some said it lived on rooftops. Some said it didn't have a face, only a dark shape. In parts of northern Mexico, older people described something even stranger, a being that came not to punish disobedience, but to collect a debt. They spoke of it like a tax collector of fear, something that arrived when a community had suffered, when grief was thick, when tragedies piled up. Dr. Rojas began to map disappearances against history, drought years, epidemics, violence. She found clusters of reports after tragedies, wars, famines, mass migrations. It was as if El Cucuy appeared when people were already afraid, as if fear called it or fed it. Her research brought her eventually to a mention in an old regional archive, an entry about a town called San Esteban, and a series of child disappearances in 1912. The archive was sparse, a few paragraphs, a note about a mining incident, a priest's report mentioning mass hysteria and superstitious panic. The official record dismissed the story, but a margin note, written in different ink, caught Dr. Rojas's eye, sealed the well, broke the symbols, never spoke the name again. Dr. Rojas felt her skin prickle. Symbols? Sealed the well? The archive did not explain. She decided to go. San Esteban, when she arrived, was smaller than she expected. The road into town was cracked and dusty. A few houses stood empty, windows broken. The church still stood, but its paint was peeling. The well in the churchyard was there too, chained shut. Dr. Rojas found an old woman selling herbs in the shade. The woman's eyes were sharp, ancient. Do you know about El Cucuí? Dr. Rojas asked in Spanish, careful. The old woman's mouth tightened. We do not say that. Dr. Rojas nodded, respectful. Do you know about what happened in 1912? About the missing children? The old woman watched her for a long moment. Then she spat on the ground as if warding off bad luck. The town remembers, she said, even if we pretend not to. Dr. Rojas introduced herself, explained her work. The woman listened, then gestured toward the churchyard. You see the well, she said. We sealed it because it listened. Listened? Dr. Rojas repeated, notebook ready. The old woman leaned closer, voice lowering. When the mothers cried, it drank their tears. When the children laughed, it learned their voices. When we spoke the name, it heard and came. Dr. Rojas's pen paused. Who sealed it? The old woman shrugged. Men, priests, anyone who was still alive. Do you know about the mine? Dr. Rojas asked. The old woman's eyes narrowed. You should not go there. Dr. Rojas smiled politely. I'm only studying folklore. The woman's expression did not change. Folklore is what we call the truth when we are afraid to say it. Dr. Rojas stayed in San Esteban for 2 nights. She interviewed elderly residents who still remembered stories from their grandparents. Each account carried the same shape: a creature of darkness, a hunger for children, a connection to sleep, to whispers, to wells and mines and old places in the earth. On her second night, Dr. Rojas lay in the small guest room of the only inn still running. The walls were thin. The wind rattled the window. She wrote late into the night, excitement humming through her despite exhaustion. Around midnight, she heard tapping, slow, deliberate. She froze, pen suspended. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the window. Dr. Rojas rose, heart pounding. She stepped toward the glass. Outside was darkness, the empty street faintly lit by a distant lamp. Tap. Her throat tightened. She reminded herself, animals, branches, wind. Then she heard the whisper, soft as breath. Maria. Her name. Dr. Rojas's blood turned cold. She stumbled back from the window. Her mind raced. No one here should know her name. She hadn't told the innkeeper her full name. Only Doctora Rojas. The whisper came again, closer somehow. Maria. Ven. Sleepiness washed over her suddenly, heavy and sweet like a drug. Her eyelids drooped. Her body wanted to sink into the bed, to surrender. Dr. Rojas fought it. She slapped her own face hard. Pain flared, sharp. She grabbed her recorder and switched it on, hands shaking. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then a soft laugh, distant. Dr. Rojas sat on the bed, trembling, recorder running, whispering into it. I heard it. It knows my name. She did not sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, Dr. Rojas went to the churchyard well. She stood near the chain and stone lid, staring. The air around the well felt colder than the sunlit morning should allow. She leaned in, pressed her ear to the stone. For a moment she heard nothing, then she heard breathing. Slow, deep, patient. Dr. Rojas stumbled back, pulse racing. She ran to the old woman selling herbs, found her in the shade again. It's real, Dr. Rojas said, voice shaking. It whispered my name. The old woman's expression was grim, not surprised. You listened too long, she said. It heard you listening. Dr. Rojas swallowed. What is it? The old woman's eyes flicked to the well, then away. It is hunger, she said. It is the space between what we know and what we refuse to know. It is what comes when we are careless with fear. Dr. Rojas left San Esteban that afternoon, shaken but determined. She told herself she had experienced suggestion, exhaustion, the power of environment. She told herself she could explain it, but she couldn't explain the recording because on the tape, beneath the sound of her own breathing, there was a whisper. Clear, soft. Maria. Dr. Rojas returned to the city with her research and began writing a paper. She presented her findings at conferences, cautious, framing it as folklore patterns, mass psychology. She did not mention the whisper on the tape except privately, to a colleague she trusted. Her colleague listened, face pale, and said, "That's not a trick." Dr. Rojas laughed nervously. "It must be." But after that, Dr. Rojas began sleeping with the lights on. She began waking at night, convinced she heard tapping. She began dreaming of wells, of darkness opening like a mouth. Her final journal entry, found after her death, was only one sentence. "I think I saw him." Dr. Rojas died in 1982, officially from a car accident. Her notes vanished. Some say her colleagues stored them. Others say her family burned them. A few whisper that the notes disappeared because someone didn't want the story to grow stronger. Because stories are food, fear is food, and El Cucuy is always hungry. In 1998, a truck driver named Ramiro drove a late-night route through the desert near Ciudad Juarez. The road was long and empty, the kind of road that makes time feel thick. Ramiro kept himself awake with coffee and radio static. He had heard of El Cucuy as a child, of course, but he hadn't thought of it in years. Adults don't have time for monsters, not when bills are due and sleep is precious. Around 2 in the morning, Ramiro saw a figure in the road ahead. Small, thin, standing perfectly still. Ramiro swore and slammed the brakes. The truck shuddered, tires screaming. He stopped a few feet from the figure. His heart hammered. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. It looked like a child. Ramiro felt anger flare. Who lets a child wander on a highway at night? He opened the door and climbed down, calling out, "Oye, niño!" The figure did not move. Ramiro approached cautiously, boots crunching gravel. As he got closer, he noticed the figure's proportions were wrong. Too tall for a child, but too small for an adult. And the head was tilted strangely. "Hey!" Ramiro said again, reaching out. The figure lifted its face. Ramiro saw eyes, pale, reflective, like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. Then the figure smiled. Ramiro froze. Every instinct screamed at him to run. He blinked, and the figure was gone. Just gone. No footfalls, no retreat into brush, nothing. One moment it was there, the next the highway was empty. Ramiro stood shaking in the desert night, hearing only his own breath. Then he looked down. Tiny footprints were pressed into the dust on the roadside. They led away from the highway, toward darkness. Ramiro ran back to his truck and drove without stopping, heart pounding, refusing to look in the mirrors. A year later in El Paso, a woman named Teresa woke to her son, whispering in his sleep. The boy's name was Mateo. He was 6. Teresa had trouble getting him to bed. He fought sleep like a battle, always wanting one more story, one more sip of water, one more question answered. Teresa, exhausted, sometimes used the old warning without thinking. "Duermete," she'd say. "El Cucuy viene." Mateo would roll his eyes, then hide under the blanket, half laughing. One night, Teresa woke to tapping at the window. Tap, tap, tap. She sat up, heart suddenly alert. The window curtains shifted slightly as if brushed by something outside. Teresa held her breath, listening. Then she heard a whisper from the window, soft, coaxing. "Mateo." Teresa's blood turned cold. She glanced at Mateo's bed. He was sitting up, eyes open, staring at the window as if hypnotized. "No," Teresa whispered, scrambling out of bed. "No, no." Mateo slid out of bed and walked toward the window, barefoot, expression blank. Teresa grabbed his arm, yanking him back. "Wake up!" she hissed, shaking him. Mateo's eyes blinked, unfocused. He began to cry, suddenly terrified, as if waking from a nightmare. Outside the window, the tapping stopped. Teresa pulled back the curtain with shaking hands, expecting to see a prankster, a stray branch, anything. She saw a shape crouched on the windowsill outside, thin, dark, too long-limbed. Its eyes glowed faintly. Its mouth stretched in a smile that did not fit any human face. Teresa screamed. The shape slipped down from the windowsill and vanished into the night, moving with impossible silence. Police arrived. They checked the yard. They found nothing. No footprints, no broken latch, no signs of intrusion. But on the windowsill, faintly scratched into the paint, were shallow gouges like claw marks. Teresa moved the next week. She did not tell neighbors why. Mateo began sleeping with a nightlight. He began asking in a trembling voice, "Mom, did you call him?" Teresa never answered. Because how do you tell a child that the story you used to scare him might have been listening? If you ask people what El Cucuy looks like, you'll get different answers. Some say he is a shadow with eyes. Some say he is a hairy beast with a sack. Some say he is an old man with a crooked spine, carrying a bag full of crying children. Others say he has no face, only darkness, only the idea of a mouth. But there's a reason for that. Because El Cucuy, if he exists, is not a single creature. He is a shape made from fear, a mask worn by something older. In some indigenous stories, there are beings that live in the earth, spirits that inhabit caves and wells and mines. They do not belong to the world of sunlight. They belong to the underworld, to the places humans disturb when they dig too deep. They are not evil in the way humans think of evil. They are hungry. They are transactional. They take what is offered, what is forgotten, what is left unprotected. Now, imagine a town like San Esteban in 1912. Imagine fear thick in the air. Imagine mothers whispering a name. Imagine children lying awake, wide-eyed, hearing the warning, feeling the thrill of terror. Imagine that fear as smoke rising, drifting toward old places in the earth. Imagine something in the darkness, something ancient, turning its attention upward. What if El Cucuy is not summoned by disobedience, but by belief? What if the warning is not a threat, but a ritual? Speak the name. Feed the fear. Invite the thing closer. The oldest version of the story doesn't say El Coco punishes bad children. It says El Coco takes children who won't sleep. That detail matters, because sleep is a boundary. When you sleep, you enter another place. Dreams, unconsciousness, vulnerability. When you are awake in the night, you're crossing a boundary too, staying in the world of light, even when the world has turned dark. Maybe that boundary is what El Cucuy guards. Or hunts. Maybe El Cucuy prefers children, because children are closer to dreams, closer to fear, closer to believing in what adults pretend not to see. And maybe the true purpose of the story is to make children sleep, to keep them safe by forcing them across that boundary before something else decides to cross it for them. But stories don't always protect. Sometimes they create the very danger they warn about. And sometimes the ones who hear the story grow up and forget until they hear tapping at a window and suddenly they remember. Because fear is never truly gone. It waits, like El Cucuy. Some nights in old towns, people still claim to hear whispers near wells. They claim the air grows damp, cold, as if underground water has risen into the house. They claim to see shadows gather in corners that should be ordinary. And sometimes, a child refuses to sleep, staring into darkness with wide eyes, convinced something is watching. The mother sighs, exhausted. She whispers the warning without thinking. Duérmete, she says softly. El Cucuy viene. In the dark corner of the room, something listens, and far away, deep in earth, something stirs. It does not rush. It does not need to. Because the night is patient, and fear is a slow feast. If you ever find yourself awake late at night, listening to your house settle, feeling that strange sense that the darkness is thicker than it should be, remember this. Do not speak the name. Do not dare the story to become real. Do not feed the thing that lives in whispers, because El Cucuy does not need to be seen to be dangerous. He only needs to be believed. And once he knows you believe, he knows where to find you. So tonight, when the light fades and the world grows quiet, pull your blanket close. Close your eyes. Let sleep take you. Because some people say El Cucuy comes for the disobedient. But the old ones, if they're honest, will tell you something else. El Cucuy comes for the awake, and if he whispers your name in the dark, don't answer.